Let's break it down straight from the hill to your hometown. No spin, no hype, just facts we find. AI's on the case, no truth left behind. Laws are written, deals are made. Who's got your back, who's throwing shade? We cut through the noise, decode the text, keeping it real. Congress in context, Congress in context, shining the light, breaking it down so you know what's right. Policies, folks, who's working for you? We bring the facts, the power is you.
Welcome in, everyone, to another deep dive. This time, we're going right into the heart of the Congressional Record, March 3rd, 2025. The date, you might want to circle on your calendars, folks, because this one's got it all. You know, the big debates, the personal stories, that kind of human touch you don't always expect from those hallowed halls of Congress, and even some shout-outs to local heroes that'll warm your heart, so buckle up.
Yeah.
You know, we're about to see how the sausage gets made.
You know, it never ceases to amaze me how much this single document, the Congressional Record, really captures. You know, we've got everything from international human rights issues like those Iranian Christian asylum seekers we're going to talk about, to the long shadow of, you know, the Trump-era policies still echoing in the halls of Congress. Plus, we're going to get into some of the nitty-gritty of legislation like cybersecurity and federal contracting. Those are big deals that affect all of us.
Okay, so let's start with something that really hit me hard reading through this Representative Ghassemzadeh's testimony about those Iranian Christians who are stuck in Panama facing deportation. It's just heartbreaking. You know, they fled religious persecution only to end up in this bureaucratic limbo.
And what makes her appeal even more powerful is, you know, her own background. Her parents were Iranian immigrants, so she knows exactly what these families are going through. The fear, the uncertainty. It's not just some abstract policy debate for her. It's personal.
Yeah, it definitely adds a whole other dimension to this whole immigration debate. She's calling for a halt to these expedited removals, specifically for folks in this situation, you know, people fleeing for their lives. She's saying we can't turn our backs on them. It's a tough one. What are your thoughts on this whole thing?
Well, you know, it's a classic example of how decisions made in Washington, you know, in those marble buildings have real world consequences for people all over the globe. On one hand, you've got to consider border security, maintaining a system that's fair to everyone. But on the other hand, you can't just ignore the human cost, the moral imperative to help those who are truly in need. It's finding that balance. That's the tough part.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? And speaking of, you know, things that make you think, did you catch Representative Comer's speech? He's still pushing that drain the swamp, America first rhetoric, even though it's been years since Trump left office.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? It just goes to show how certain figures and their slogans, they have this staying power. They shape the way we talk about issues for years to come. Whether you agree with Comer's approach or not, you can't deny that he's tapping into something that still resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how long that Trumpian influence will linger. Yeah. Okay, let's switch gears here for a second. We've got Representative Harrell doing some serious championing for veterans, which is always a good thing in my book. She's laser focused on making sure they have access to healthcare, transportation, you know, educational opportunities, all that good stuff.
And the way she did it was really effective. You know, she told this story about Master Sergeant Roland Cooper, Coop Dog, they call him, and the guy has to drive hours just to get to his VA appointments. It's a real problem for a lot of rural vets, and she's pushing for legislation that would make it easier for them to get the care they need.
Yeah, the Coop Dog nickname that really got me, you know, makes it so much more real. These aren't just statistics we're talking about. These are real people with real struggles. But here's where things get interesting. There's also talk of potential job cuts at the VA, which seems kind of counterintuitive to this whole push for better access.
Ah, yes, the eternal struggle of government, right?
Yeah.
You've got one hand trying to streamline things, save money, all that, and then you've got the other hand trying to meet the needs of a growing population, in this case, veterans who depend on these services. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out.
No doubt about it. And then, of course, we have the granddaddy of all political footballs. Social Security Representative Thompson made a pretty impassioned plea for increasing benefits. He pointed out that there are folks in his district who haven't seen a raise in like 50 years.
Yeah.
He even brought up Elon Musk's wealth, which is a pretty bold move in that context.
Yeah, he's not pulling any punches, is he? What I found interesting was how he tied the struggles of his constituents to these bigger questions of wealth inequality and social responsibility. It's like he's saying, look, we have the resources to take care of our seniors. It's a matter of priorities, and he's not afraid to call out those who he sees as benefiting from the current system while others are left behind.
He even threw out the statistic that 189,000 Social Security recipients in his district alone haven't seen an increase in decades. It's a powerful image, even if you disagree with his solutions. But then you've got the other side of the argument, right? The concerns about the program's long-term sustainability and the potential need for cuts down the line.
Yeah, it's that age-old dilemma. How do you balance the needs of today with the needs of tomorrow? It's a tough calculation, and there are no easy answers, but it's something that lawmakers will continue to grapple with.
For sure. No silver bullets there. Now let's get a little bit technical, shall we? We've got H.R. 872, the Federal Contractors Cybersecurity Vulnerability Reduction Act of 2025. Bit of a mouthful, but it's actually pretty important stuff.
Oh, it's huge, especially in this day and age with cyber attacks becoming more sophisticated every day. This bill would require all government contractors to have a vulnerability disclosure policy in place, which basically means they'd have to be more transparent about potential security flaws and have a plan to address them quickly before someone exploits them.
So it's all about being proactive. Staying ahead of the bad guys makes sense. But how do they enforce this? I mean, how do you make sure every contractor, big or small, is actually following the rules?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something lawmakers are still trying to figure out. There's talk of clear guidelines, penalties for noncompliance, but the details are still being worked out. It's a delicate balance, you know? You want to ensure security without creating so much red tape that it stifles innovation.
Yeah, you don't want to make it impossible for smaller businesses to compete for government contracts. And while we're on the topic of government contracts, let's talk about H.R. 856, the Safe and Smart Federal Purchasing Act. This one seems to be challenging the whole lowest price, technically acceptable approach that's so common in government procurement.
This is where things get really interesting. They're basically questioning whether this laser focus on cost is actually counterproductive in the long run. They're raising concerns about cutting corners, sacrificing quality, and even creating national security risks by always going for the cheapest option.
Yeah, it's like you wouldn't want the cheapest heart surgeon operating on you, right? Sometimes you really do get what you pay for.
Exactly. And that's the argument they're making with this bill. They're saying when it comes to things like innovative technologies or complex services, the lowest bidder might not be the best option. They want the government to take a more holistic approach, consider the long-term value and potential risks, not just the immediate bottom line.
So it's about being smart with taxpayer money, not just penny wise and pound foolish, right? It's about investing in quality and making sure we're not setting ourselves up for bigger problems down the road.
It's a valid point, and it applies to so many areas of government spending. It'll be fascinating to see if this bill gains any traction and whether it leads to a real shift in how the government approaches procurement.
Yeah, something to keep an eye on for sure. Okay, let's take a little detour here and talk about some of the more human moments captured in the Congressional Record. There's this really touching bipartisan resolution honoring the victims of that tragic plane crash, American Eagle Flight 5342, and that Black Hawk helicopter that collided over the Potomac. It's a stark reminder that even in the midst of all the political battles, there are moments of unity and shared grief.
It was a powerful moment. You could really feel the empathy from both sides of the aisle. They acknowledged the need to learn from this tragedy to improve aviation safety, and they offered condolences to the families and first responders who were affected.
It's good to be reminded sometimes that we're all human, even our elected officials.
Yeah.
And on a slightly lighter note, there were a bunch of representatives taking time to recognize achievements within their districts. Everything from Terry Forch's contributions to Kentucky communities to the Penn State through attendance dedication to fighting pediatric cancer.
Yeah, I love those little glimpses into the more personal side of Congress. It shows that they're not just robots churning out legislation. They're also people who care about their communities and want to celebrate the good things happening around them.
Absolutely. And one story that really stuck with me was about Sarah Keys Evans. She refused to give up her seat on a bus years before Rosa Parks. Talk about a hidden figure in the civil rights movement.
It's amazing how these little nuggets of history can pop up in the most unexpected places. It's a reminder that there are so many untold stories out there, and it's important to keep digging and learning from the past.
And that's just scratching the surface of what we found in the Congressional Record for this one day. There's so much more to unpack, so stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive, where we'll continue exploring this fascinating world of Congress and the issues that are shaping our nation.
picking up where we left off, it's clear that this whole cybersecurity thing is really front and center in Congress right now, especially when it comes to government contractors.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense, right? If a contractor gets hacked,
Yeah.
that could be a backdoor to all sorts of sensitive information. Like they're finally realizing that the weakest link can bring down the whole chain.
Exactly. And that's why this whole push for vulnerability disclosure policies is so interesting. It's about creating a culture of transparency, rapid response, instead of sweeping those security flaws under the rug. The idea is to encourage quick reporting and patching things up before they can be exploited.
Okay, so sunshine's the best disinfectant, right? But you mentioned earlier that there's some debate around this HR 872, the one focused on contractors. What are the sticking points?
Well, some folks are worried about national security. There are provisions in the bill for waivers in certain situations, like if revealing a vulnerability could compromise ongoing research or intelligence operations. So finding that balance between openness and protection, that can be tricky.
So it's like you want to be open about the problem, but you don't want to give away the playbook to the bad guys at the same time.
Yeah, precisely. And then there's the whole question of oversight. Even with the best intentions, how do you make sure that every single contractor, from the big guys to the mom and pop shops, are actually implementing these policies effectively? It's a huge logistical challenge.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then we have this other bill, HR 8526, that's taking aim at how the government chooses its contractors in the first place. The lowest price, technically acceptable thing? It sounds good in theory, but...
But in practice, it can lead to some pretty questionable outcomes. This bill is basically a giant question mark hanging over that whole system. Like, are we cutting corners just to save a few bucks? Are we prioritizing the bottom line over long-term value or even national security?
It's like that saying, penny wise and pound foolish. You might save a little up front, but end up paying way more in the long run.
Exactly. And this is especially relevant when we're talking about cutting-edge technology or highly specialized services. The cheapest option might not be the most capable or reliable, and that can have serious consequences.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't go to the cheapest doctor, especially if it was something serious.
Exactly. So this bill is trying to encourage the government to think more strategically about its spending, to consider the bigger picture instead of just focusing on the lowest bid.
Speaking of the bigger picture, we can't talk about the Congressional Record without talking about Social Security. It's like that relative that everyone has an opinion about, but nobody's quite sure how to handle.
It's a perennial topic, and for good reason, millions of Americans rely on it, and it's always at the center of this tug of war between, meeting the needs of current beneficiaries and making sure the program is solvent in the future.
And we saw that play out with Representative Thompson's argument for increasing benefits. He painted a pretty vivid picture of the struggles faced by people who haven't seen a cost of living adjustment in decades.
And he didn't shy away from using some powerful imagery. He even brought up Elon Musk's wealth as a point of contrast. It was a pretty bold way to highlight income inequality and challenge this idea that we can't afford to take care of our seniors.
Right. It's like he's saying if we can afford to fund space exploration, surely we can afford to make sure our seniors have a decent standard of living.
There's a certain moral weight to that argument, and it definitely makes us think about, what values and priorities are driving our policy decisions.
But then, of course, you have the other side of the coin, those concerns about the program's financial stability and, that looming fear that we're spending beyond our means and leaving future generations with a mountain of debt.
It's a valid concern, and it really highlights the complexity of this issue. There are no easy answers, and finding a sustainable path forward is going to require some tough choices and compromises.
Yeah, it's not like someone's going to wave a magic wand to make it all go away. It's something we're going to be wrestling with for years to come. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the Department of Education. There's a surprising amount of chatter in the Congressional Record about potentially abolishing it altogether.
That's a pretty radical idea, and it points to a much bigger debate about the role of the federal government in education. Those who support abolishing the department often argue that it's bloated bureaucratic and that education should be handled primarily at the state and local level.
But then on the flip side, you have plenty of people who believe that the department is essential for ensuring equal access to quality education, especially for students from disadvantaged backgrounds.
Exactly. They point to programs like Title IX, which prohibits sex-based discrimination in education, and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which guarantees appropriate accommodations for students with disabilities. These are federal laws enforced by the department, and many people argue that getting rid of it would put those protections at risk.
So it's kind of a battle between those who want less federal involvement and those who believe a strong federal presence is necessary to level the playing field.
That's a good way to put it, and it's a debate that's likely likely to continue as long as we have a public education system.
It's one of those issues that really gets to the heart of what we think the government should be doing. And speaking of the future, there's this recurring theme in the Congressional Record about the need to invest in innovation, especially in fields like science and technology.
It's a recognition that the future belongs to those who are pushing the boundaries of knowledge and developing new technologies. We see this reflected in the discussions about funding for research institutions like the NIH and this push for STEM education to prepare students for the jobs of tomorrow.
Right. It's like they're trying to make sure America stays competitive in the 21st century economy where brain power is the most valuable resource.
And it's not just about economic competitiveness. It's about tackling some of the biggest challenges facing humanity, like finding cures for diseases, developing clean energy sources, combating climate change. These are all things that require significant investment in research and development.
It's like we need everyone working together to solve these global problems. And it's encouraging to see that Congress is at least acknowledging the importance of innovation and investing in the future.
Absolutely. But beyond those big ticket items, it's also really heartening to see so many representatives taking the time to acknowledge individuals and organizations who are doing amazing work in their local communities.
Oh, yeah. Those moments are like little bright spots in the often dry and technical language of the Congressional Record. It's a reminder that there's still so much good happening out there.
It's a beautiful tapestry of American life, woven together by these acts of service, compassion, innovation. And it's a reminder that even amidst the political battles and policy debates, there are people out there making a real difference every day.
It's like we often get so caught up in the negative, the gridlock, the partisan bickering, that we forget about all the unsung heroes who are working quietly to make their communities better.
Exactly. And recognizing those efforts, whether it's a teacher going above and beyond for their students or a local business owner creating jobs and revitalizing their neighborhood, that's an important part of what makes a society thrive.
Couldn't agree more. And we're not done yet. There's still more to uncover in this deep dive into the Congressional Record, so stay tuned for part 3, where we'll wrap things up and explore what it all means for you, the engaged citizen. So we've covered a ton of ground, everything from cybersecurity to social security.
Yeah.
But one thing that keeps popping up is this tension between, focusing on problems here at home versus tackling issues on a global scale.
It's a constant balancing act for policymakers, and we saw that reflected in the discussions about, foreign aid, international alliances, even the after effects of the Trump administration's decision to dismantle USAID and cut foreign assistance back in 2017 that's still reverberating today.
Yeah, it's such a complex issue. People have really strong feelings on both sides. Some folks say we need to fix our own problems before we start sending money overseas.
And there are legitimate concerns about, how effectively foreign aid is actually used. There have been cases of mismanagement, corruption, even situations where aid has created dependency instead of helping countries become self-sufficient. It's not as simple as just writing a check and hoping for the best.
But then you have folks who argue that foreign aid is crucial for global stability, security, that it can help alleviate poverty disease, even advance American interests abroad.
They make the case that investing in developing countries can create new markets for American goods and services, reduce the threat of terrorism, instability, even foster goodwill towards the U.S. It's like planting seeds that can grow into these mutually beneficial relationships down the line.
So it's not just about altruism. It's about recognizing that we're all connected in this globalized world.
Yeah.
And everyone benefits from greater stability and prosperity.
Exactly. And speaking of interconnectedness, there's also a lot of talk in the Congressional Record about the importance of those international alliances like NATO. There's growing concern about the threat posed by Russia and China, especially with what's happening in Ukraine and the South China Sea.
It feels like we're entering this whole new era of geopolitical competition. And it's not clear how it's all going to shake out. What are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely a time of uncertainty, and the stakes are incredibly high. The decisions that policymakers are making right now will have ripple effects for years to come, not just for the U.S., but for the whole world. It's so important for leaders to approach these challenges with, wisdom, diplomacy, and a commitment to finding some kind of common ground.
Yeah, saber rattling and isolationism don't seem like the answer in today's world. We have to find ways to cooperate and address these shared challenges like climate change, pandemics, economic instability. Otherwise, we're all going to lose.
I couldn't agree more. And I think the Congressional Record gives us this really valuable insight into how these issues are being debated and addressed at the highest levels of government. It's not always pretty. There's plenty of disagreement. But it's a reminder that democracy is a messy process. It requires constant engagement, debate, compromise to find solutions that actually work for everyone.
So what does all this mean for us, the everyday citizens, trying to make sense of this crazy, complex world? How do we stay informed, make our voices heard?
Well, first of all, don't be afraid to jump into the congressional record yourself. It's a public document, and while it can be a bit dense at times, there are resources out there to help you navigate it, websites, newsletters, podcasts like this one that break down the key issues and debates.
And never underestimate the power of contacting your elected officials. Let them know what issues you care about, share your perspective, hold them accountable for their actions. Even a simple email or phone call can make a difference.
Remember, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires active participation from all of us. So stay informed, engage in civil discourse, and don't be afraid to speak up for what you believe in.
Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the Congressional Record for March 3rd, 2025. It's been quite a journey. We've explored policy debates, heard personal stories, and even caught a glimpse of what the future might hold for our nation and the world.
Hopefully this deep dive is giving you a better understanding of just how complex our political system is and why it's so important to stay informed and engaged.
Thanks for joining us on this exploration, and remember, your voice matters. Until next time. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep pushing for a better future.